We covered running backs already. Now let's break down the rest of the free agency frenzy. Quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends. A lot more fantasy relevance came from the running back position because we had some better names there, but still tons of moves to break down. Let's get right into it. So the quarterback position, you guys can see a lot of the quarterback moves on the screen there. This is courtesy of PFF's free agency tracker. The biggest blockbuster that we're waiting for at quarterback is actually Aaron Rodgers potentially going to the New York Jets. It hasn't officially happened yet, but it seems like all signs are pointing to it taking place at some point. It looks like the Jets and the Packers are just trying to work out trade compensation, but Rodgers has openly said that he wants to play for the Jets, and that's where he wants to go. Garrett Wilson, obviously, once this happens, Garrett Wilson solidifies himself as a top 8 wide receiver in Dynasty. Could be a huge quarterback upgrade for Garrett Wilson. Even if we see last year's version of Aaron Rodgers, not the 2 previous years when he was the back-to-back MVP, Garrett Wilson sees a big-time upgrade coming from, Zach Wilson and Mike White throwing him the ball. Breece Hall, of course, will be wheels up once he's healthy. And Elijah Moore should be one of the biggest bounce-back candidates in all of fantasy. So definitely, we're waiting with bated breath until Aaron Rodgers signs with the New York Jets, and definitely once it happens, it's going to be big-time news for the Jets. From an NFL perspective, they're going to become one of the bigger contenders in the AFC, and then from a fantasy perspective, we can feel a lot more comfortable about drafting their weapons. Lamar Jackson is another big-time domino at the quarterback position. He was franchise tagged by the Ravens, hit with the non-exclusive franchise tag, which means that he can negotiate with other teams, and if they offer him the type of contract that he wants to sign, then the Ravens will have an opportunity to match it, and then they would have to send the Ravens 2 first-round picks as compensation for Lamar Jackson. It looks like the Ravens are playing chicken with Lamar because they know that no team will pony up 2 first-round picks plus a huge guaranteed contract for his services. So the Ravens also, even if that were to happen, have the right to match, as I said. This might result in a holdout, in my opinion. I think the Ravens are probably going to be like, hey, you don't want to sign the contracts we've given you. You can just play on the franchise tag this year and prove yourself once again. So I'd venture a guess to say that this gets done before the NFL season, but it is possible that this kind of leaks into training camp, leaks into the preseason, potentially even into the regular season as well. So I doubt anybody's selling, but if you can get any kind of uncertainty discount on Lamar Jackson in Dynasty, go ahead and send out some offers. He's still only 26 years old. So even if this contract leaks into the season and we have to worry about maybe Lamar missing a little bit of time because he's holding out, he's eventually going to get paid somewhere. And again, he's only 26 years old. He still has at least 5 more years of high-level fantasy production left in the tank. We can move on to Geno Smith, who re-signs with the Seattle Seahawks, 3 years, $75 million. We know how great he was at the beginning of last year, right? He came out, guns a-blazing, was one of the best quarterbacks in the league from a, passing grade perspective, yards per attempt, all that kind of stuff. He started to taper off a little bit as the season went along, and that makes me a little nervous about Geno Smith, potentially like they caught lightning in a bottle last year and it won't ever happen again, and them paying Geno Smith might look like a big-time mistake. But he's got those young linemen, right? Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, who were playing as rookies as the left and right tackle. They're going to go into year 2, probably get better. You still have DK Metcalf. You still have Tyler Lockett. I've seen them mocked receivers at 20 or whatever. So it's possible that they still add a receiver or a tight end in the draft. Plus, you still have Kenneth Walker out of the backfield. So it's still set up to be probably a good offense. And it's great news for Geno Smith's dynasty value because he's now insulated as a startable QB2, QB3 type in Superflex formats. And it also helps insulate our Seahawks pieces because we know, that Ken Walker can be a high-level fantasy running back with Geno at the helm. We know that DK Metcalf can be, a wide receiver 2 or better. Tyler Lockett, a good flex piece, if not better than that as well. So we should be well set up to know what the Seahawks are going to be for the next couple of years. But I still do worry a little bit that Geno Smith was more like Case Keenum in Minnesota than he was like Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. So that's something that definitely makes me a little bit nervous. And I don't think this precludes them from taking Anthony Richardson at 5th overall. So if people in your league are dead sold on Geno Smith as like a top 15 dynasty quarterback now because he proved what he could show last year, I still think there's some risk. I still think that he could lose some value. And I probably would still be willing to ship him off for like a first-round pick. Like if you can get a pick equivalent to that of where Will Levis is going to go in dynasty rookie drafts, I would probably re-roll right into Will Levis as opposed to holding a guy like Geno Smith. So The next move that we can get to at the quarterback position is Derek Carr, who signs a 4-year, $150 million deal with the New Orleans Saints. To me, I think this was a stupid move for New Orleans. I think with their aging roster, they probably should have just stunk this year and had a young quarterback picked highly in 2024. But instead, they're trying to desperately hold on to a winning window. Dennis Allen's probably coaching for his job. And they'll probably finish first in the NFC South because our division's absolutely terrible with like 8 wins or 9 wins and probably get trounced by the Cowboys or the Eagles in the first round of the NFL playoffs. So from a dynasty perspective, though, Chris Olave sees a big-time upgrade from, Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston, who was thrown to him last year. He is now set up for a huge, huge breakout second season with a solid quarterback and Derek Carr throwing him the ball. Derek Carr is, a fine win-now quarterback. If you guys have, let's say Justin Fields and Daniel Jones as your top 2 quarterbacks in a dynasty league and you're trying to compete, if you wanted to go out and trade, closer to the season for Derek Carr to have some depth there, I don't think that's a terrible move. Maybe Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara can figure some things out, and maybe Juwan Johnson's a decent sleeper tight end. But for the most part, I think Chris Olave is the only guy that I actually care about in this offense from a dynasty perspective. Now let's get into Danny Dimes, going back to the New York Giants. 4 years, $160 million deal, basically a 2-year deal with guarantees. But again, good news for the middle class of quarterbacks, because if you look at the quarterback landscape before free agency, we had, the top guys, the top like 12 guys or whatever. Then we had the rookie quarterbacks coming in, and then there was really no like young-ish but not elite quarterbacks. And Daniel Jones kind of fits that description as one of the only guys that we can be moderately excited about from like a win now perspective. And, long-term, he's still not that old. He's still like 26 years old. So Daniel Jones, a fine quarterback too now. 4 contenders, has some value insulation now with a contract, but I probably wouldn't go crazy buying low on Daniel Jones. But I do trust that Daboll kind of knows what he's doing. And I do think you can kind of rely on him for QB2 production. So Jimmy Garoppolo signs with the Las Vegas Raiders, 3 years, $67.5 million. I think this is great news if you guys had some Jimmy G shares. And I know I had a couple shares of him because he was virtually really inexpensive for a guy that I still think is one of the best like 30 quarterbacks in the NFL. So I knew he would get a starting job somewhere, whether it was with the Raiders or, potentially the Texans or the Colts or whatever the case is. He's a cheap QB3 production piece. If you guys are weak at that position, like I said, I probably wouldn't buy him right now because there's still a possibility that they could draft a quarterback at 7. Although I think McDaniels knows that he's coaching for his job. So if you can get Jimmy Garoppolo for like a late second round pick at this point in time, and you need a QB3 for your contending dynasty roster. So if you can send your mid to late 2024 second for Jimmy Garoppolo, maybe plus a small like contending receiver or something like that, I think that would be a fine move to make. He's got an offense with Adams, with Renfro, with Jakobi Meyers to throw to, Josh Jacobs out of the backfield. So it wouldn't shock me if we get, borderline top 15 production in points per game out of a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo from a redraft perspective, which is definitely going to, be a good investment if you spend like a mid to late second round pick on him as QB depth. So those were the main like starter deals. We also had a couple bridge deals, a couple, competing with young guy deals that we can talk about here as well. Baker Mayfield signs with my Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 1 year, $8.5 million deal. I think this is a great move. As a Bucs fan, I want a tank, right? I want Caleb Williams. I want Drake May. I want one of these 2024 quarterbacks. And to me, Baker Mayfield versus Kyle Trask in training camp seems like tanking without actually tanking, in my opinion. I would use this to offload Baker Mayfield if you guys have him in any leagues. I'm not expecting a career resurgence out of Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay. And I would very much expect the Buccaneers to not be very good, to have Todd Bowles fired, and the Bucs to address the quarterback position in 2024. So for me as a Bucs fan, I'm cool taking a bad season this year if it means we get an exciting young quarterback in 2024, whether that is Caleb Williams or we miss out on him and we still get Drake May or maybe JJ McCarthy, Quinn Ewers, whatever the case might be. So likely not great news for Evans and for Godwin from like a win now perspective if you guys have them on many of your teams. I think Godwin can be just fine because he's an easy target for Mayfield or Trask to hit over the middle. But Mike Evans, definitely not a great situation for him. He could still potentially get traded, although I don't think that the Glazers would allow Jason Light to actually trade the best player pretty much since they've owned the team. Honestly, better than Trask starting outright, but those guys will definitely be tough to get into once we delve into redraft content. So another kind of bridge deal that we have here is the king of bridge quarterbacks, Jacoby Brissett, who's now been a bridge quarterback for like 3 straight years. He signs a 1 year, $8 million deal with the Washington Commanders. I think this is great news for a couple people involved. number one, I think it's great news for Sam Howell because this is a winnable starting job for him, right? They said that he was going to be the starter going into the season. Then they kind of walked those comments back and they were like, no, we're going to bring in a veteran for him to compete with. But they could have brought in Derek Carr. They could have brought in Jimmy Garoppolo, somebody a little bit better than Jacoby Brissett, or at least a little bit more, higher name cachet and who would have commanded more money. So I think a 1-year, $8 million Jacoby Brissett, I think it's great news for Jacoby Brissett as a guy that could potentially start more games. I think it's great news for Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin and the gang, because if the floor is Jacoby Brissett starting, 10 to 12 games next year, that's honestly better quarterback play than they had with Carson Wentz last year, than they've had with Taylor Heinicke in years past. And most of Terry McLaurin's career, he hasn't had very good quarterback play. And I think if we get what we got out of Jacoby Brissett last year with how he played for Cleveland, I think that's going to be the best quarterback play that any of those guys have really seen. And Brissett legitimately played like a top 15 quarterback last year. He was like a top 12 quarterback in PFF passing grade before Watson took over the job. So quarterback's a little bit interesting in Washington for the first time in years. I think Sam Howell is going to win the job, but I think best case scenario for Dotson and Terry McLaurin happened, where if Sam Howell's not the dude, then Jacoby Brissett can start some games for them, and they'll probably get a QB upgrade in 2024. So the last bridge deal that we have here is Taylor Heinicke, who is formerly of the Commanders, signing now with the Atlanta Falcons, 2 years, $14 million. I think the Falcons could still draft somebody at number 8, because I think the way that you look at it now is Las Vegas and Seattle could be out of the quarterback market. They might not be, but if Will Levis is on the board for Las Vegas and Seattle, they could definitely still pass on the guys, because I think for sure CJ Stroud is going 1 and Bryce Young is going 2. That just leaves Anthony Richardson and Will Levis of the teams in the top 10. And Atlanta is one of the only teams now in the top 10 that actually needs a quarterback. So there's a chance that one of those guys just outright slides to them. There's a chance that they could go, trade up a little bit to get into striking range. And to me, this move inspires some confidence in Desmond Ridder, but I would probably use this to offload Desmond Ridder if people don't think Taylor Heinicke is a big enough threat to take over the job. So for me, I think you don't really have enough at quarterback yet. Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heinicke is fine if you miss out on quarterback in the NFL draft, but I do think they're going to address quarterback still, whether it's at 8, maybe they go after Hendon Hooker in the second round, whatever the case is. I don't think that the Falcons are just going to go into the season with, Taylor Heinicke and Desmond Ridder. And if they do, they're kind of doing exactly what Tampa Bay is doing, which is tanking for 2024, which is definitely possible. But if Will Levis is on the board there at 8, I think that the Atlanta Falcons would probably pull the trigger on him. So this is definitely going to be an interesting, offseason for Atlanta, because last year they were one of the most run heavy offenses, we've seen in the last couple years. They threw it historically low, like 25 times a game when Marcus Mariota was starting games. So even Taylor Heinicke and Desmond Ridder would be an upgrade for Kyle Pitts and Drake London. But I think what's going to end up happening is Will Levis is going to slide to them, and they might actually have, an exciting-ish rookie quarterback on a rookie deal to build around. So the rest of the quarterback deals were pretty much backup deals. Minshew signs with the Colts, Mariota to the Eagles, Taylor Heinicke, like I said, goes to the Falcons, Mike White goes to the Dolphins, Sam Darnold to the 49ers. None of these moves are really that exciting, but I think Darnold to the 49ers is semi-interesting as camp, battle camp competition for Trey Lance if Brock Purdy is recovering from the injury. So let's move on to the wide receiver position. There has not been much excitement here because the free agency class is just not good. But we do have a couple moves to talk about. First being Jakobi Meyers, who was the big domino, I guess, in free agency. He goes to the Las Vegas Raiders on a 3-year, $33 million deal. With Darren Waller now traded and away from the Las Vegas Raiders, it kind of opens up some targets over the middle. But I don't love this move overall, right? If you had Jakobi Meyers, you were hoping he went to Carolina. You were hoping he went to a team that had a lot of targets available, because now we have Renfro, who's a pure slot. We have Jakobi Meyers, who's pretty much a pure slot. And we have Devontae Adams, who works in and out of the slot, and all these guys kind of accomplish the same goal. So, I mean, it is a Patriots type of scheme with McDaniels there. So it looks like they're trying to build like this dink and dunk type of offense here, but they don't have any speed on this offense, right? Jakobi Meyers ran like a 4.7. Devontae Adams isn't very fast. We also have Josh Jacobs, who ran like a 4.6, and Hunter Renfrow is like a 4.6 guy. So no speed on this offense. Unfortunately, they could use Henry Ruggs right now, who was the only source of speed that they had for this team. I wouldn't be shocked if they addressed another wide receiver in the draft, whether it's like, Jalen Hyatt at some point, or, Zay Flowers or Josh Downs or somebody that can give them a little bit more juice, or maybe they draft a guy like Devon Achane who can give them some speed, because this is a very slow offense as it currently stands. Even your quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, can't run. So definitely not too sold on what the Raiders are doing, but it kind of makes sense knowing the scheme that they come from and how the Patriots like to operate things. So I definitely, like I said, would have been better for Myers to go to Carolina. unfortunate if you were holding Jakobi Meyers. And then speaking of Jakobi Meyers, Juju Smith-Schuster basically replaces him in New England, the same type of contract, 3 years, $33 million. I guess guarantees are a little bit different. Jakobi Meyers was guaranteed more money, but they basically pay him the same contract with less guarantees. To me, I would have rather just re-signed Jakobi Meyers if I was the New England Patriots. To me, I think it's time for Juju to sink back into who the hell cares mode from a dynasty perspective, because he doesn't have Patrick Mahomes to carry his ass anymore. So I really don't care about Juju going to the Patriots. I think they're going to dress wide receiver, and I don't think Juju's very good. So the Patriots, not a great move for them. I think they should have just kept Jakobi Meyers and then addressed their number one wide receiver position in the NFL draft. So that's just my 2 cents. I'm not sold on this Juju move. If people are, for whatever reason, excited about it, just sell him. Allen Lazard goes to the New York Jets. 4 years, $44 million. To me, this kind of just looks like a lateral move because I think Corey Davis is going to get cut, and then Lazard will be the new X receiver there. And we have Lazard on the outside in 2 wide receiver sets with Garrett Wilson at the Z, and then Elijah Moore will come in playing the slot receiver role. So it seems like a lateral move, like I said, but Lazard sees a slight upgrade for his own value because I think playing with Aaron Rodgers will most likely mean that he's going to have more spike weeks, more weeks that are good in best ball. If you guys play in Dynasty best ball leagues, when you don't have to choose when to start this guy, or if you're just talking redraft wise, he's going to be a good best ball option as well. 4 years, $44 million is not nothing. You got a decent amount of money, but to me, I don't think he's that good of a receiver. And I think Garrett Wilson's still the one here. Elijah Moore is still better than Allen Lazard, and he should be the wide receiver too. But I think Lazard will probably play on the outside in 2 wide receiver sets, which hurts Elijah Moore a little bit. So Darius Slayton and Michael Thomas stay with their teams. Slayton had some weeks with New York, and I think he'll probably be a fine best ball pick as well, but not all that interesting in my opinion. They'll probably add wide receiver talent in the draft. Of course, they brought in Darren Waller, which I'll talk about in a bit. And then Michael Thomas, if healthy, can still be a productive fantasy wide receiver like we saw at the beginning of last year, but he almost feels like drafting AJ Green did in 2019 and 2020, where theoretically, if AJ Green could stay healthy back then, he would have been great for fantasy. But prime Michael Thomas is not really in the building anymore. He's a great fit for Derek Carr if he is in the building, but he might just be washed, to be honest. So Michael Thomas, to me, I'm not overly excited about him from like a dynasty perspective or a redraft perspective. I was much more in on him last year, but it was kind of like fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, and I got fooled last year. So I'm not going to make that mistake again. If he falls to like the round 13 to 15 area of a startup and I'm building a contending roster, I suppose I could take a shot on Michael Thomas, but for the most part, I'm not all that excited about Michael Thomas going back to the Saints. And then we also have Deontay Hardy, who went to the Buffalo Bills, likely could replace Isaiah McKenzie. But all that being said, there's not a whole lot that went on at wide receiver. We could still see like DeAndre Hopkins get traded, Odell Beckham signed somewhere. But for the most part, I think the wide receiver position has dried up. Now let's get into the tight end position. The biggest domino, I would say, free agent wise, was Dalton Schultz, and he hasn't gone anywhere yet. So we don't have any information on that. But Darren Waller going to the Giants for a 3rd rounder is definitely the biggest shift at this position so far. Darren Waller will be 31 years old in week 1 of this year, and he hasn't played more than 11 games over the last 2 seasons. So he's kind of starting to feel like what I kind of mentioned with Michael Thomas, where instead of AJ Green, he kind of feels like Jordan Reed. Like towards Jordan Reed's end of his career in 2018 and 2019, people were still excited about him because it was only a couple years that had passed that they were like, hey, if Jordan Reed could just stay healthy, he could actually be great. But I think predicting health with Darren Waller could be a slippery slope. I think he could still be a top 6 tight end in fantasy. So it's definitely a risk that could pay off. It's a barren receiving core. There's pretty much nobody there outside of Darren Waller and Saquon Barkley out of the backfield. And last time we saw Darren Waller be very productive was when the Raiders had no receivers. So Waller, if he can still play, could be an elite tight end still, but and he's worth a shot if you're a contender in Dynasty, if you can get him for like a mid-second round pick, I think. But his ADP on Underdog is round 8 to 10. And I think a lot of people are going to start to grow on him more as the offseason progresses. They're going to start to talk themselves into Darren Waller with the Giants a little bit more. And I think he's going to end up as like a round 6 pick. And to me, I'll probably be out at that price. But if he stays in that round 8 to 10 area in redraft leagues, I think I'll be in on that. And if you can get him as like a 10th, 11th, 12th round startup pick for a contender, I don't think that's a terrible way to build out your tight end core either. So the other big domino here was Evan Engram, who got tagged by the Jacksonville Jaguars, signs the franchise tag 1 year, $11.35 million. I think they're going to be fun next year. This offense is going to be really, really fun, and I want pieces of it. Can he recapture the magic that we saw in the fantasy playoffs? I don't know. I'm kind of skeptical that that's going to happen yet again because we've seen, 6-7 years of Evan Ingram's career where he hasn't been all that productive, and he just had like one stretch of games at the end of the year in the fantasy playoffs that have fantasy managers kind of, googly eyeing him a little bit. He's expensive in best ball right now, too. If you wanted to draft him in big board drafts, tight end 7 is too pricey, in my opinion. But I think the reason he's up there is because the Jags will be everybody's pick for breakout offense. So it kind of makes sense why Evan Engram is up there in value, but I'm probably going to be out on him in that price. And same goes in Dynasty. He's getting a little bit older, not all that productive for most of his career. So I'll probably be steering clear of Evan Engram, but I do think if he slides a little bit, he's worth a shot. And then a couple other moves that we saw at the tight end position. Unfortunately, Mike Gesicki lands as the tight end 2 in New England. You thought Gronk and Hernandez was special. Wait till you see Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki. Ew, man. Like, I don't know what the hell Bill Belichick is trying to do there, letting Jakobi Meyers walk. Like, no speed on this offense. Gesicki's probably runs the fastest 40 of anybody there. And even him, he doesn't really play fast. So not a great move overall for Mike Gesicki. Definitely hurts him if you guys were holding him, hoping he would, sign to the Cardinals on like a 3-year deal or something like that. Definitely doesn't happen. Hayden Hurst goes 3 years, $21.75 million to Carolina. It looks like they're making some moves to bring in some pieces around, CJ Stroud, probably who they're going to draft at first overall. Miles Sanders, who they sign at running back. Hayden Hurst, who they sign at tight end. They still have a top 40 pick in the NFL draft to draft a wide receiver, which I think they absolutely should. So definitely an interesting move there for Carolina. And I think Hayden Hurst sees a little bit of an uptick in his value because we didn't really know what to think. Ideally, he would have went back to Cincinnati, but I don't think that was something that we were really expecting to happen. We were expecting him to hit free agency and sign like a 1-year deal, but instead he gets a 3-year deal with Carolina, which I think is pretty solid. And then, Geno Smith gets traded to the Falcons. Who the hell cares? I don't really care for Pitts or for Genu's sake. So that is the end of the video. If you guys, stuck around to the end, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new. If you want to check out my rookie rankings, my dynasty rankings, those are all available now at flockfantasy.com. Today is Friday as I'm recording this. If you guys want a chance to be in our new listener league, go ahead, hit the Google form down below in the pinned comment and fill out that Google form showing that you signed up for a new package there at flockfantasy.com. Make sure to use that promo code FSE so we know that you guys got credit for it and you guys can support us that way as well. And you'll be entered for a chance to be in our new listener Dynasty Startup League, which we will be drawing for, probably Saturday afternoon at some point. So make sure if you guys have signed up on Flock Fantasy, go ahead and fill out that Google form. That is the only way that you're going to be entered. Even if you've signed up already and you didn't fill out the form, you might not be entered to be in the new league. So make sure that you do that. Link down below in the pinned comment and in the description as well. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.
Why you need the money?